Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Last night at UFC 270 in the main event, we saw Francis Ngannou versus Ciryl Gane for the UFC Heavyweight Championship. And coming out of this main event, there is so much to discuss. I had to make a video on it. There's people speculating whether or not that may have been the last time we see Francis Ngannou in the UFC octagon. There's people reporting and talking about the fact that Francis Ngannou fought out his contract, but I don't know if that's necessarily true. We're going to talk about that. Also, there's a couple things that Dana White did at UFC 270, one in particular that I feel like not a lot of people are pointing out or talking about, and I think it's really relevant to this entire situation. And also, I think there's a real probable scenario where we don't see Francis Ngannou fight for about a year and a half, 2 years. We're going to talk about all that in this video. I'm going to give you what I think is actually going to happen in this video. But guys, do me a favor. If you enjoy videos like this, make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe. So first, let's talk about something that I had no idea I would even be talking about, when I turned off my TV last night after watching the main event. And that's the fact that people think this fight is controversial as far as the scorecards. Francis Ngannou comes in as the heavyweight champion. Ciryl Gane's the interim champion. And Francis Ngannou defends via decision. He wins a decision. I thought it was very clear-cut. The first 2 rounds were close, but I gave him to Ciryl Gane. Really not really eventful rounds. I mean, Ciryl Gane was just kind of hitting the leg a little bit. I wouldn't even call them hard leg kicks by any means. Just kind of slapping the leg around. There was a couple punches, a couple jabs that landed here, a couple body kicks. But the first 2 rounds were very uneventful. Then you had the last 3 rounds, which was basically Francis Ngannou taking Ciryl Gane down and holding him down. We can talk about the limited amount of strikes that he threw once he had him down there, but that doesn't change the fact that he had effective grappling in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. In the 3rd round, he landed some good punches. After he took him down, he caught a kick, slammed him. I think he got back up, took him down again. But either way, in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, the majority of the fight was contested on the ground. Francis Ngannou taking Ciryl Gane down and holding him down. And that's the way he won the fight. He won it 3-2 in my opinion. I think it's very clear-cut. I don't think there's any controversy, but somehow there's people out there, maybe one of you guys are watching this right now, that think this fight is controversial. Ciryl Gane did close to nothing on the feet. And then Francis Ngannou took him down for the last 3 rounds and held him down for the vast majority of those rounds. And there's a narrative out there, and a lot of people are repeating it, that, Ciryl Gane won because damage is priority on scoring. Well, I don't know what fight you guys were watching, but I didn't see any damage from Ciryl Gane throughout the entire fight for the most part. So, I know he landed some good shots, but there was no damage on Francis Ngannou after the fight. If you looked at both their faces, definitely Ciryl Gane had more damage worn on his face. I know that's not how we score fights, but I'm just saying, the people saying the damage card, I just think that's factually incorrect. And I genuinely believe this. I'm always on my channel, I'm always okay with the fact that we're not always going to agree. People see fights differently all the time. We can have an educated discussion about it. But I honestly believe if you look at Ciryl Gane versus Francis Ngannou, and you think that Ciryl Gane won the fight, and I mean this with respect, you are living in an alternate reality, because it couldn't have been more clear-cut. Ciryl Gane's corner even told him at the end of the 4th round, you're losing this fight. And even at the end of the fight, Ciryl Gane knew that he lost the fight. So I don't know what universe you guys are living in, what fight you watched. And again, in the grand scheme of things, us fans truly lost because the fight wasn't that good. And, it is what it is. But I wanted to talk about the scoring because I know that's a hot topic right now. Francis Ngannou won this fight, and I know people are going to say, and people said it in my post-fight last night, how can you win a fight by taking a guy down and just laying on top of him and doing nothing? I understand that. I understand your frustrations, but how can you win a fight by being taken down and laying on your back for 3 rounds doing nothing? That's the question I pose to you. So let's move on a little bit. Francis Ngannou clearly won the fight. He's still the heavyweight champion, and we're going to talk about the fact that he came in this fight with injuries. He apparently had an injured knee or injured knees. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but apparently he has an MCL tear, ACL, partial tear, or something like that. We don't have all the exact specifics, but that is just insane to me. I know we talked about it a little bit last night on the post-fight, but the fact that Francis Ngannou came in and he was able to enact a strategy to win this fight against a tough test like Ciryl Gane, and he was able to do it with an injured knee, I think that's spectacular. And a lot of people thought Francis Ngannou can only get this fight won with his knockout power. Well, we've seen that wasn't the case. This guy has been leveling up his skills for years, and he was able to use the wrestling to beat Ciryl Gane in a fight where Ciryl Gane was outboxing him from range, even though it wasn't by a large margin. So let's move on a little bit and start talking about whether or not Francis Ngannou fought out his contract. So that's a common theme going on, that Francis Ngannou fought out his contract. And while it's partially true, I feel like it's a little bit deceptive, because Francis Ngannou signed a deal. This was the last fight on his deal. But the UFC has a championship clause. And what that means is, on the last fight of your deal, if you win a championship, in this case, Francis was defending the championship, but still, he won a championship fight. He is still the UFC heavyweight champion. Your fight contract is automatically extended for 1 year or 3 fights. So Francis Ngannou has already said he's not going to fight anymore until he gets a new contract. So we already know that he's not fighting those 3 fights unless he gets a new contract. So bare minimum, he's extended for 1 year. And then let's say the UFC and Francis can't come to terms. Then after that 1 year, I believe, I'm not 100% sure of this, but it's in a lot of contracts. After a contract expires, the UFC has exclusive negotiating rights. And what that means is, after a year, it's usually 3 months, the UFC and Ngannou can only, Ngannou can only negotiate a contract with the UFC. He can't talk to Bellator. He can't talk to boxing promoters. He can't talk to BFL. He can't talk to One. He can't talk to Rizin. He can't talk to anyone but the UFC for those 3 months after the contract expires. So right there, you have 15 months that Francis Ngannou could be potentially tied up. And then after that, let's say he goes through the year, he goes through the 3 months, and now he's talking to boxing organizations, he's talking to PFL, he's talking to Bellator, he's talking to whoever. If he signs a contract with them, the UFC has matching rights. So if he signs a deal with, let's say, Bellator, he has to take that contract back to the UFC. The UFC can take one look at it and say, okay, we'll match it. And then he's re-signed with the UFC. We've seen it in the past with guys like Gilbert Melendez, where he signed with Bellator. It was a big story. Then Gilbert Melendez took the contract back to the UFC, and then the UFC matched it and kept Gilbert Melendez. So we've seen it in the past. Moving on, the 2 things that Dana White did last night that I feel like not a lot of people were talking about, and you could tell that Dana White is absolutely livid that Francis Ngannou won this fight. I made a video earlier in the year. I think it was either end of December or early January, so it could have been the end of 2021, early 2022. But I did a video that the UFC and Dana White were actively rooting against Francis Ngannou to win this fight. They wanted him to lose, because now you have a weird situation where you have a champion who's a little bit disgruntled. He's had contract issues with you in the past, and now he has all the leverage. I know the UFC still has leverage. They can basically make him sit out for 1.5 years. That's what I was talking about before. But to have Francis Ngannou, your heavyweight champion, potentially walk would be an absolute terrible look for the UFC. You think they want to have Francis Ngannou walk out and devalue the belt? He has a win over Ciryl Gane, a knockout win over Stipe Miocic, who are 2 of the best heavyweights in the division. Basically, if Francis Ngannou leaves that heavyweight belt behind, it devalues the entire heavyweight division, and people are going to have that Francis Ngannou shadow just looming over top of the heavyweight division, and it's just not going to be good for the UFC or Dana White. And that's why the UFC was really actively rooting for Ciryl Gane to win this fight, because then Francis Ngannou has now officially completed his contract. He's fought out his deal, but he's lost. He really doesn't hold all that much leverage. The UFC can say, okay, see you later. We don't need you. I don't think they would still do that. I think they still should keep Francis Ngannou in the UFC. I think he's a valuable heavyweight fighter. But at the same time, it's not the same as if he is the heavyweight champion. So after the fight, Dana White always puts the belt on the champion. When that decision was read, if you guys saw in the cage, Mick Maynard, the matchmaker, was the one to put the belt on Francis Ngannou, not Dana White. Dana White left the arena, is what I'm assuming. Dana White did not even show up at the post-fight presser, which I know a lot of people are talking about that, but nobody was really mentioning the fact that he did not put the belt on him. We've seen him do this in the past when he's like pissed off or whatever, doesn't like a particular fighter, and it just goes to show that, Dana can make, okay, these contract negotiations, we've had hard people to deal with, but he really takes this shit personal. And in this, situation, he said he was so disgusted that Francis Ngannou won, he didn't even want to go wrap the belt around him. And I know what he'll potentially say after the fight. When he's eventually asked about it, he's going to say, the fight was boring. I was upset that the fight was terrible. The whole arena was booing. You don't want to have fights like that. And that's why he's going to say he didn't want to put the belt on him, because the fight was terrible. But we've seen him do it plenty of times before. And I guarantee if Conor McGregor was in the same fight for a title and Conor McGregor won in the exact same way Francis Ngannou won, I'm sure that he would wrap the belt around Conor McGregor. So also I wanted to talk about in this video, because there's just so much to talk about, a little bit about the topic of fighter pay. And I know a lot of people are always saying, oh, these fighters get paid a lot. Francis Ngannou goes in there for 30 seconds and gets paid $600,000. My philosophy on fighter pay has always been, you kind of should get a percentage of what you generate. And I have some numbers in front of me that I just made up off the top of my head. And it just goes to show how vastly underpaid some of these guys are, whether you like them or not. So Francis Ngannou was getting paid $600,000. I think Brandon Moreno's getting $150,000. And Davison Figueiredo got $150,000 and then a $150,000 win bonus. Which, we can talk about whether or not there should be win bonuses or not. But I want to really talk about the fighter pay specifically. The entire roster, or not the entire roster, the entire fight card payroll was less than $2 million. The UFC put out less than $2 million to pay every fighter on the card. If the UFC sold 300,000 pay-per-views for UFC 270, they made $23 million. I just came up with 300,000 buys. I don't think that's a stretch. I think it probably sold far more than 300,000. I wouldn't even be surprised if it sold 500,000. So if they sold 300,000 buys, they made $23 million. They paid the fighters, every fighter on the card, less than $2 million total combined. And then on top of that, you have to add in the gate, which usually, I don't know what the gate for this was. I didn't pull that up. Could be $5 or $6 million. So we have an instance where the UFC made $30 million. Every single fighter made less than $2 million combined. That's insane to me. And I just wanted to point that out. I know sometimes we get caught, saying, oh, this guy doesn't deserve this. This guy doesn't deserve that. But at the end of the day, if they're generating that type of revenue, they should at least get a portion of it. They shouldn't be getting less than 10% of the revenue. In other sports, it's mostly 50-50 from what I understand. And I'm not even saying they should do that. I know the UFC puts out a lot of expenses. They're setting up the arenas. They have a lot of workers. They put out a lot of promotion to sell the event. And I just think it's a bad look, especially when you really look at those numbers. Even those numbers I just made up real quick, that's an absolute travesty, especially Brandon Moreno, Davison Figueiredo. I think Davison Figueiredo ended up making like 300,000 or 350,000. I'm not 100% sure, but that is still vastly underpaid. And I know people also bring up the discretionary bonuses. You should not be at the will of the UFC for discretionary bonuses after the fights. That is just, you don't get credit for that when that's not guaranteed. And also you get to pick favorites, for Francis Ngannou, you think he's getting a discretionary bonus? Dana White doesn't even want to put the belt on him. You think he's getting a discretionary bonus? I don't think so. Before I end this video, because I don't want to make this video too long, let's talk about what's next for Francis Ngannou. Because, it's hard to really define what could be next for him. Let's say he does re-sign with the UFC. Okay, let's go off that. I think the only logical option next is Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. I think this pay-per-view will sell over 1 million buys. You have a freak of nature like Francis Ngannou, who's shown he's added more skills to his arsenal in his last fight against Ciryl Gane. He beat a well-rounded guy in Ciryl Gane. And you have the consensus light heavyweight GOAT moving up a weight class, finally debuting at heavyweight, fighting this freak of nature in Francis Ngannou. I think that is the only fight to make for the UFC. There's no other fight that will even be comparably as big as that fight. I think that's the biggest fight the UFC can make right now. So it has to be Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. But honestly, I don't know if the UFC gets this deal done with Francis Ngannou. We've seen Dana in the UFC has had nothing but troubles with Francis Ngannou's manager. I don't know all the behind-the-scenes details of that. But usually when Dana in the UFC doesn't like a manager, it's usually because that manager is doing well by their fighter. We've seen it plenty in the past. And, for me personally, I'm always on the side of people getting paid more. So I hope Francis Ngannou gets a fair deal. I think he's worth far more than 500 or 600,000 just based off what he's bringing in to the company. But I don't know if they re-sign him. I truly don't know. So maybe after, I could see Francis Ngannou sitting out a year and a half, and then eventually signing some type of boxing contract. Me personally, as a fight fan, I think this would be a travesty. I have no desire to see Francis Ngannou go box, but apparently this is like a dream of his. But just from my limited knowledge of boxing, And Tyson Fury would absolutely smoke Francis Ngannou. He would be way too slow, absolutely way too slow, no footwork. You think he's going to plot forward like the way he did against Ciryl Gane and not get clipped up by Tyson Fury? Absolutely not. I have no desire to see that. But at the end of the day, if that's going to get Francis Ngannou his biggest paycheck, he's 35 years old. Who knows how much longer he has in combat sports? I wish him the best, but I really do hope, and I think it's best for the fans. I think it's best for the UFC if the UFC is able to get a deal done with Francis Ngannou, re-sign him, book the Jon Jones fight. I think that has real potential, if promoted properly, to be one of the top 2 UFC pay-per-views of all time. I think it would be right up there rivaling some of the Conor McGregor pay-per-views where he's done 1.4, 1.5 million pay-per-view buys. I think Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones would be huge. I would love to go to that event live. That would be absolutely insane. But who knows what's going to happen. I'm going to be making a bunch of more UFC 270 content in the next couple days, so guys, keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like the video.